Sometimes when we talk about success, we only talk about the highlight reel, the big schools, the global companies, the impressive titles. But we don't always talk about what it costs to get there, or the quiet questions you carry with you along the way. Questions about self-worth, about belonging, about whether any of it actually means something. That's why this conversation felt important to me. Today I'm speaking with Christopher Williams, someone whose journey started in Sierra Leone, in a home where education was the one real shot at a different life. He left the continent as a teenager on a scholarship, built a career across some of the biggest global institutions, and did everything many young Africans are told to do if they want to make it. But along the way, he had to wrestle with things we don't always say out loud. How do you hold on to your self-worth in spaces that weren't built for you? How do you succeed in corporate rooms that tolerate you but don't fully see you? And after you've achieved all of it, what does success even mean if it doesn't connect back home? In this episode, you'll hear Christopher talk about confidence, courage, and the long road to leadership. You'll hear him reflect on why he stepped away from corporate life and why his focus now is simple: helping young Africans believe in themselves, build real capacity, and make a difference right here on the continent. My name is Fola Folayan, and this is Minding Your Business Africa. If you're an aspiring broadcaster or a working journalist looking to sharpen your skills, the Radio Masterclass is for you. The Radio Masterclass provides practical training in broadcast journalism, helping African journalists develop the skills, tools, and confidence needed to tell authentic African stories and deliver credible journalism. With self-directed virtual courses and customized training and consulting, you can learn at your own pace wherever you are. To get started, visit www.theradiomasterclass.com and take the next step in your radio journey. The first thing I'll ask you is a little bit of background. What early experiences growing up in Sierra Leone shaped your worldview, your sense of purpose? What challenges did you face leaving Sierra Leone for the US early in your life, and how did you navigate them? So we can start from there.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak with you. I was born in Sierra Leone in the early 70s and then moved to the US when I was about 18, maybe almost 18 and a half, to attend college. So my early years, all of my childhood was in Sierra Leone. And I think that story is probably quite similar to others as well, in that post-independence, the country, the leadership, got embroiled in infighting that had political dimensions, to some degree, ethnic dimensions, and then descended into rampant corruption and obviously the institutions of state and the economy, and to some degree the cultural fabric, was stretched. So, and that just continued for many, many decades with different regimes and leaders, and nothing seemed to get better. So at a very young age, I think I was very aware that my parents' own vision for themselves as sort of parents of a young family that they had big dreams for, those visions sort of disappeared, and it seems like they then refocused their time and their energies on us becoming educated. So I grew up in a family, in a household that was very focused on us getting the best education that they could afford. And that included exposing us through books and through radio. At the time, it was focused on BBC World Service, on the world outside of Sierra Leone. And I also knew at a very young age that if I wanted to have the kind of life of impact or even prosperity that I wanted, I might have to go abroad to study. So at a very young age, I think I'm about 10 or 11, I know I want to study abroad, but I also am very clear in my mind that my parents could not afford it and I would have to earn a scholarship. And therefore, education and being good at school and being well-rounded became a big priority at a very young age. And that's how it worked and that's how it happened. And so when I look back on Sierra Leone, I have a couple of different perspectives. One, obviously, of the moral and, political and economic decay. But beyond that, it's a place of people with resilience, people with hope and optimism, people who could work hard and had infinite faith in the future. And I think that has guided Sierra Leoneans through lots of different stages of unrest and challenge. And the country still continues to function today, even though not in the way that you would expect. Well, the culture continues to function, even though the country as a state, is not functioning as well as it could. When I moved to the US, it was interesting because after all the experiences in Sierra Leone, I came to the US and started to experience many firsts and, realized that, oh, wow, there's this thing called racism that I knew about theoretically, but it actually exists and understand what it felt like. But the good thing is the grounding in Sierra Leone had built a lot of self-worth and self-understanding. So I don't think it impacted me in the way that it would have impacted others who didn't have that grounding.
Yeah.
What I had to work on in the US more than anything else was self-confidence because as an African, you're aware that globally and geopolitically, the continent is not always at the table. So you sort of internalize some of that.
Yeah.
And as an individual, you kind of carry that with you. But the
Yeah.
good thing is that with a strong grounding in self-worth and with a strong educational background that we have, we're able to develop the experiences through our education and our focus on success that help reinforce confidence because we can show up and we can do the work and we can succeed and then we can realize that, okay, I'm good, I can do this. And then self-confidence comes. But that comes, it takes a while, but it comes. So I think it's an easier thing to work on, quite honestly, than self-worth. So in many ways, that's kind of what I found out when I moved to the US. And then I started to, in a weird way, realize how fortunate I was because as much as I had studied in like the early part of my life in the country, which was, in many ways not the best model of how countries are run, as a person, as a family, we had a lot of wealth in the quality of the love and the caring that had nurtured me along all those ways along the way. And it showed when I went to the US because you were sort of not um, completely insensitive, but you're somewhat impervious to the things that would normally shake or rock other people's sense of self. And with education, which is something no one can take away from you, you can also actually make progress. And I realized I was luckier than other people who did have that background. And I think that's the earliest instinct that I had around the power of education, the power of self-worth and self-confidence and agency that lasted in many ways alongside all my corporate and professional success, which led me to the kind of work that I do today. So I'm going to stop there. It's a long answer to your short question, but I hope that gives you a sense of who I am and why I do what I do.
Yeah, it certainly does. When you were speaking about being young and looking at, considering the kind of life you wanted to live and realizing that you will have to travel abroad, to get the kind of education to open the doors that you would want to open. It's kind of like it's the same right now. Things haven't really changed across the continent because a lot of African, youth still feel that pressure to succeed and not just pressure, but the desire to. And you look around you, you realize that your immediate environment doesn't necessarily give you the opportunities or, the access to the quality of education, the quality of life, the quality of opportunities that you would want. And so we still have a lot of young people either working to go abroad or waiting to go abroad or doing everything they can to get a scholarship, to get a fellowship opportunity, to get any kind of opportunity that can take them out of the continent. And, listening to you talk about self-worth and self-confidence, there are those who believe that if you do have self-worth, or if you really want to have your self-worth developed as an African youth, then you should look inwards and not necessarily look outside to get it. So I'm putting both
Yes.
side by side right now and asking, what are your thoughts about it? Because for me personally, I find it very hard to blame any young African now
Mhm,
who
mhm,
who wants to go outside of the continent. I used to be able to school, very strong about making sure that even if I leave my home country, I'm still within the continent. But now,
mhm.
with the way things are happening politically, economically, geopolitically, everything, I'm like, see, if you want to go, go.
It's
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, and I have to start off and say there's no one answer. And I also cannot begrudge others who are trying to navigate some of the choices that I had to navigate myself.
Mm,
And the choices that I pursued ended up being good for me in terms of what I was looking for. I was educated at Morehouse. It's a very reputable school in the US.
yeah.
I ended up um, earning my MBA from Harvard Business School, which obviously is well known. I started my career in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, and then Goldman Sachs later, and spent 25 years in the sports and lifestyle fashion industries. Worked for Gap, Nike, Adidas, and VF Corporation in ascending order of seniority, in ascending, seniority. And I left in 2018 to begin to work on my own. At a
Yeah.
relatively young age in terms of how corporate careers evolve. I was not even 50. I was in my late 40s when I had my last corporate role, and I've been independent for the last, almost like 8 years. So in many ways, all of those things worked out in the economic sense and the professional sense. But again, the story's still being written. It's not over yet. But
Yeah.
I do want to acknowledge that in the last 10 years, one thing that I've reflected more and more on is this idea that I became professionally successful, but personally unfulfilled. And I think that is almost all of the considerations that you talked about in many ways sort of converging and coming home in one big moment of realization that you have the need and the urge, and you see the opportunity to leave the continent, but at the end of the day, something brings you all the way back. So I
Mm,
think where I am now is not with regret at the choices, about the choices, but now more, how can I make them count? How can I really pull all of those elements together and help somebody somewhere? And not just
mm,
in a superficial transactional way, but in a foundational way.
mm,
And so going back to what you started off talking about, I don't know that I can say what the young people are thinking is good or bad. I think I know a fair amount of them who have decided that they want to stay in the continent and work in the continent. And I think that's a testimony to the fact that the global society is maybe not as open to immigration as it once used to be.
yeah.
I think it's because maybe some of those people now have family or parents who did the westbound trek, but then came back and have sort of demystified it.
Mm,
I think it's because educational levels across the continent, as much as we think there's much work to be done, have increased, and people are actually now learning how to navigate the local context a bit more. I think it could be because, and I think this is a good point, technology has become sort of this enabler,
yeah.
and we are now beginning to discover that we can leverage that technology in Africa in ways that are helpful and commercial. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of things happening that have changed from 30 years ago. that makes some people want to stay. But I still think it's not enough. There's still maybe too many people who want to move on.
Yeah.
And in my experience, coming back full circle, I can say that even after living outside Africa for now close to 30 years, a lot of my mindset is consumed by what I can do now with everything that I've developed you know, and amassed in terms of knowledge, skills, network, etc. What I can do
Mm,
to come back and make a positive difference. And so I think many people are going to hopefully go through that full circle, maybe not all, but I
mm,
think the more people who can commit themselves to helping the continent in some way, no matter where they are doing it from,
mhm.
I think the better.
No, I agree. I totally agree with you on that. And I wanted to, when you talked about, working in corporate spaces and, you mentioned a few places that you have worked at, it got me thinking about a lot of young Africans who are entering into the corporate environments right now. And sometimes if you're in those spaces and you're not in your home country or within the continent, you realize that the structures there, the design of that place was not exactly done with you as a young African professional in mind, and you have been able to navigate that environment successfully and climb up the leadership ladder. So, what are your thoughts really about African youth in corporate leadership? How to get in those spaces, how to make your impact felt, and most importantly, how to communicate all those things that you've learned and experiences that you've gained to work back home, like you're doing.
Again, I would caveat and say I wouldn't say I have mastered, how to navigate and ascend in the Western corporate world. I think the fact that I decided to leave it at some point shows to some degree the challenge that one needs to overcome to continue to stay in it and thrive. And not just thrive professionally, but also intellectually, and I would say even more importantly, um, in the context of your peace of mind and the quality of your health.
Mm,
So these environments, I mean, generalizing here now, but these environments by and large really exist to create wealth for owners of these enterprises, whether
yeah.
they be shareholders, big investment organizations around the world
Hmm.
who are looking at their investments quite closely and always applying pressure on leadership to do well with them. But also in terms of management structures, in the US context, they're also incentivized with equity and ownership, and therefore they have a vested interest in doing well. And much of this is really singularly focused on the amassment of wealth and to do so in a very short period of time.
Mm,
And so when you find yourself in an environment, you have to understand that fairly quickly that your value really at the end of the day is calibrated in the degree to which you are contributing to that wealth generation, income generation, revenue generation process.
hmm.
And so the good and the bad things that you come with training and experience and training from Western institutions, whether I'm African or not African, I went to Morehouse, whether I'm African or not African, I went to Harvard. So you learn the same thing. And
Yeah.
because we have a work ethic and we can apply ourselves, what I've found is that, immigrants generally and Africans especially do really, really well in sort of contributing. I think the challenge is always going to be there because the quality of your contribution is coming from a very unusual place.
Mm,
The organizations develop a very interesting love-hate relationship with you. On one hand, they like this person who's a massively productive contributor, even though that runs contrary to the biases that they grew up with and the
mm.
biases that they want to maintain. That
Yeah. Yeah.
that you are somehow, you know, not at par with them. When in reality, what I found not just with myself, but with most people that I spend time with, the smartest, high impact people in terms of work were
Mm.
immigrants, inclusive that was most if not all of the Africans that I worked alongside with. But there's this myth which I'm not going to go there. People, it's been going on for thousands of years. People can believe what they want to believe, but the reality is that man to man, woman to woman, comparable background, comparable age, the Africans thrive, in
Hmm.
spite of the fact that we did not go up with the same level of access, which is even more impressive.
Yeah.
Um, because if I can meet you in a conference room in your country club that you were born in, and I came way across the country and I didn't know what a country club was, and
Mm.
then I can match you, then it shows that I've traveled much further than you have. But anyway, I won't go there now. But again, so that's a continuous struggle you're going to feel in the corporate world. You're
Yeah.
a producer, but you are held aloof, held a little bit at arm's length because you don't belong, and they keep reminding you of that, but they like the fact that you produce. So at some
Mm.
point, you got to navigate what that means in terms of you making sure that as you produce, you are being compensated for your work. You
Mm-hmm.
can argue if you'll ever be well compensated, but at least compensated for your work. But at the same time, also just knowing that you rub the wrong way on people just by your very presence, and you tolerate it because you're a producer. And so it's a game you play. And I think ultimately it's a personal choice whether you want to play that game all the way to the top, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that tension ever goes away, even if you become the CEO, even if you become a member of the board. I don't think that tension ever goes away because that's just the way it is.
Mm.
Just a question of how far and how much you want to accept and tolerate, again, in the bigger context of all the things you could be doing with your time and in the context of your own psychological and personal health. And then you sort of go as far as you want, and then you at some point you just say, I'm out of here.
I'm out.
So
Yeah.
I think that's just how it is. But it comes down to you and how much you can tolerate,
Mm.
especially if you want to hold fast to going back to the earlier concept that I talked about, your sense of self-worth, your sense of values, your sense of principle, but you
Yeah.
still know what you need to do as a professional. If you can strike the balance and you can do both well, then you will, and then do so in a healthy way, then you can sort of piece it together. But the moment one of those things begins to fall apart and then you're off kilter and your mindfulness is now at stake and lots of you it's becoming compromised,
Yeah.
and then you walk away, which is what I got to back in 2018.
Wow. I mean, you have spoken a lot in different places about, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, you have really touched on a lot of things I probably would have asked later, but I want to go back to some of your talks, on leadership and young people. And I think of right now, the pressing question on my mind is the mindset of young Africans and building capacity for leadership. Um, you already know I'm Nigerian, and one of the challenges that I think that for a lot of young Nigerians right now is feeling left out of the leadership conversations and even spaces. Political leadership, leadership in the business, in entrepreneurship. Yes, a lot of people are trying to, they're trying their hands at things, trying to set up companies, trying to be self-reliant and make a way for themselves just because they have to survive one way or the other. But it feels like um, when it comes to policy changes, when it comes to being in that space where decisions are made that would affect them and affect their businesses that they're trying to build, they're not exactly giving a voice. So is it a mindset thing, or is this a more direct issue or a more physical issue that needs to be changed? I mean, um, how can young Africans approach leadership in a way that they take their place where they belong?
It's an brilliant question, but I think that's the ultimate question. And there are lots of ways to start to answer the question, but I think one of them I would say is it's not just their role to shape their mindset. I think as best as we can, we have to support them from outside with structure, with direction, with support.
Mm.
And you might know that during my when I left my last corporate role, I ended up working first as an executive in residence, an executive in residence, but ultimately became the president of African Leadership University, which has a campus in Kigali and one in and a medium campus in Mauritius. And I think I call it that because I think to some degree it is one of the institutions, and there are others, that
Yeah.
is trying to create a bit of this structure. Because to some degree you want students and young people who are disillusioned and maybe others who aren't to come to a place where they interact with others like them and they build a network and they build a community of like-minded folk.
Mm.
And you have mentors, facilitators, teachers, all the people like me who came in and are bringing outside experience into the college of environment, really reinforcing with them that they have the power and they have agency, but also putting the external world in the context. Because to some degree, you also have to extend that understanding. The external world is a very it's a knife, can be positive or negative. And when it's
Yeah.
not negative, when it's negative, it could be a knife with a jagged edge. And to some
Mm.
degree, what I try to do is I demystify the external world so that they're not afraid of it, but they are clear-eyed about it. And then you now try to really piece by piece enable them in different ways. The internal enablement, which is a mindset, confidence, etc., worth. But then the external is sort of what are their skills, what are their functional inputs to society, and how do they engage with society either as employees of organizations that they can add value to, or even more importantly, as entrepreneurs. So I think, and I say that these environments like ALU need to exist. It doesn't need to be ALU, it could be a community group, it could be anything really. It doesn't have to be very
Yeah.
structured, as long as it's bringing young people together and creating this clarity for them. They have to
Mm.
exist because the other institutions that need to exist, that do exist, are not functioning very well. I'm talking about the big institutions of state, you know,
Yeah.
the application of law, banks that could help people with loans if they wanted to start a business. You know, all these other institutions are not functioning very well.
Mm.
So, and which is one of the reasons why, to your earlier question, young people want to leave. You know, so I think we have to create these experiences for them. And for me, it's really important, which again, why I worked at ALU, why I do a lot of mentoring, why I pick up the phone almost anytime a young African wants to speak, because I
Yeah.
want to be able to touch them and in ways that are helpful in sort of helping make sense of this picture that you painted. So I think that's really important. Um, what they have to understand, though, which I came to terms with at a very young age, is that the world isn't fair, and so don't spend
Mm.
your time losing and expending emotional energy at the basic inequity or disparity or unfairness of things.
Mm.
You know, your grandparents dealt with that and their grandparents before them. So this is not the generation that needs to drop the baton. We just
Yeah.
need to understand that resilience is part of who we are.
Yeah.
And what's important is that you engage it and apply yourselves. But what I feel like we need to do is to be supportive of that environment. So there's a lot of room for curated, supported experiences for young Africans. Because I think
Mm.
left on their own, the world feels bigger and more intimidating, and they feel more bereft and more alone because they're
Yeah.
not seeing their governments or the institutions around them functioning in their interests. And it's much more terrifying. And then they're more prone to making decisions that are quite rash or making decisions that are not well thought out. I think it's important for those of us who have perspective to be present in their lives and support them to navigate the choices that they can make because I think they innately have the skills and the abilities to do so. But it's
Yeah.
hard to have that clarity when everything around you seems like it's stacked against you.
Mm. I mean, thank you for saying that. The world is not fair, and we can't afford to spend a lot of time and exert a lot of energy just lamenting about how unfair things are. You've talked about courage a lot as a central theme, in your life, and I want to know how you came about that. How do you define courage for yourself, and how does it affect and guide your daily choices in life and in business?
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, in the few months before I left my last role, when I knew that I was likely going to step away, I was also quite determined that my next act, if you may, would be very different
Yeah.
because it was one that was informed by all of the experiences I'd had that had been positive and also even those that had been negative. And I was
Mm,
determined that it would be one that would be more intentional, more purpose driven, more meaningful. But I wanted an underlying philosophy upon which to base it. And I did not know exactly what that meant. I didn't know what it would look like. But I just felt like whatever that philosophy was, it needed to be authentic, it needed to come from me and
mm,
not something, I picked up in a, business book. So I asked myself, therefore, just one question, but in two parts. One was, when have you been at your best and what drove it? Because I wanted to say, okay, what is the thing that I already do really well that can be a powerful um, driver of my life going forward? So what is your biggest strength, or when have you been at your best? What drove it? Because you need to do more of that thing.
mm,
Then I ask myself in the same way, when have you sort of fallen short of your own expectations or fallen short of the moment? Thing that has come up again. Because again, I wanted this to be steeped in self-knowledge and I wanted to find out what is the thing that has been blocking me. And when I sat down and wrote a bunch of things, here's my best moments, here's my worst moments. Let me understand what was the most fundamental driver of each one. Two things
mm,
came became clear. Number one, that courage was the answer to both questions. So it was two things in one. Number one was courage, and number two was the answer to both questions. And for me,
yeah.
that was very powerful. And I was excited because I'm like, wow, there's one thing which I can believe in because I could see, remember different moments, and I could agree that, yeah, when I made courageous choices and done things differently, my life had benefited positively and my career had accelerated, relationships had flourished, lots of interesting things had happened. I had learned more and grown more. And when
Mm,
I became too self-conscious, maybe lacked self-confidence, taken too long, overthought it, let ego come in the way, don't have the courage to stand up to all of those things, then I was
yeah.
like in those kind of meh kind of moments. So that's what I decided would be my sort of philosophy going forward. Be more courageous. And I wanted to then unpack it and started to research it. And then I realized that courage was not just one concept, one term, one moment. Courage is the
Yeah.
ability to act in furtherance of a mission or some virtuous intent, despite the risks and the fear that you experience and you face.
Mm,
So, in spite of risk and in spite of fear, you're motivated by this thing, this intent, this purpose, and then you act anyway. And that's what courage is. And it's not just a
yeah.
thing that happens in the movies or just happens miraculously. When I started to unwrap it and unpack it, I realized it's a mindset, it's a way of living.
Mm,
And I distilled it down to seven choices that one needs to make in life. And as you practice those choices individually, they conspire with each other. And ultimately, maybe also seven of them become refined and part of who
mm,
you are. And then you begin to be and sound and appear, not superficially, but in reality, more courageous. And then you are harnessing this innate strength, what I call a superpower, capable of
mm,
transforming not just your life, but having a massive impact on the lives of people around you in the community, the communities that you find yourself in. So I ended up just writing all of that down and turning it into a book, which I launched in November. And I've been excited at how well received it's been. I had no idea that the world would unfold the way it has when I started
Mm,
writing in 2019. But the book came out right in time in a
mm.
very momentous period for the world. And I think what makes the book resonate is not just its connection with the world, though, it's how people finding themselves in the stories that I talk about. And people are coming up to me and telling me how much they identify with the book, and many people are buying multiple copies to give out to friends. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that must be really exciting. I mean, I saw the information about the book and I was really intrigued by the idea, of having a framework to, approaching your life and approaching, leadership with practical steps and tools to help you navigate all of these things. And you talked about 7 practical steps. I know that you've outlined them in the book, and I also know that you shared some personal life experiences, in the book as well. But of course, I'm not going to ask you to give all the 7 practical steps right now. But if
Good.
you can just touch on maybe the first two, because
Yeah.
a lot of people, would listen to you and will be curious to know what are these steps, to approach with courage. Because when you tell people, oh, have courage, it sounds like,
Yeah.
okay, don't be afraid. That's how we know it. Courage
Yeah.
is like the absence of fear. But now the learning that there are practical steps and tools to it, I'm very much interested in knowing what some of these steps are.
I thought all of this over. I worked on this for many years. I mean, 6 years. So I was able to make notes and rewrite them and test them and update them and edit them as I met
Mm,
and spoke with people. And in my speaking, I tested out different ideas and bounced, different concepts of different people, and I refined the idea. Well, the idea was that, like I said, you don't just tell someone, "Hey, buckle up, just go be courageous."
yeah.
I think, what I found out is that courage has to be based on something,
Mm,
and courage needs fuel. And so off the bat, purpose was something that came up in the conversations. And what I've
mm,
just done is I arranged this sort of 7 choices, and because I'm trying to make things easy for myself and readers, it, the words, the letters of the word courage represent each of the choices. And so it's easy to remember. So the first one is commit to a purpose. You have to have
commit.
you have to have a strong sense of purpose. Something needs to
Mm,
drive you enough for you to now engage fear. I mean, it's hard to be passionate about, if you're not passionate about something, it's hard to put anything at risk. Something needs to be driving you. So that's the first one.
mm,
And then the other one is own your potential. And that speaks to just agency. Sometimes we have hopes and dreams, but we don't feel like we are the ones who are going to make them come to life. We hope and we think someone else is going to do them for us. So
yeah.
owning your potential is really important. And that's a very different thing. You can have a goal, but you have to own it. You have to see yourself in the driver's seat to making that happen. And then the third is a big one everyone talks about, which is unmask fear. Fear will
Mm,
happen. And fear's job is to come in and make you be careful. And that goes back to our wiring as people, as human, as organisms. It's built into who we are as human beings. It's just that
mm,
the wiring still works, even though it was put in there, a million years ago. So the fear is not going to go away. It's like thinking about my eyesight to go away. It's not going to go away. It's part of who you
yeah.
are. The fear, though, has to be engaged.
Mm,
A saber-toothed cat is not going to take you out when you're giving a public speech. But the same mechanism works. So you got to just calm yourself down and speak to yourself. So
mm,
in many ways, you have to engage fear.
mm,
But the interesting thing about fear is that it not just comes from you, but it can come from the outside. And so that's number 4 is reject distracting voices. You're always going to have people in your ear who try to tell you or say things to you that amplify your fear. And in some cases, in many cases, they're actually people who love you, but their
mm,
concern for you and their conservatism with change injects fear into you. So you have to
mm,
manage to, either voices of malice or even voices of love, but still voices that make you become more fearful.
Mm,
Um, and then move yourself to the fifth thing, which is act and act decisively. You can plan all you want, but if you don't go into action, start the conversation, make the call the person you want to speak to, go
yeah.
to school and get that degree, stand up and stay at someone and say hello to them so you can start that conversation that you need to have with them. If you don't act,
Mm,
none of this happens.
mm,
And once you begin to act, you're going to expose yourself to mistakes. And then if
mm,
you have a sense of an obsession with perfection, you won't want to make mistakes, and therefore you will
mm,
not act. So you have to understand that making mistakes is part of the process. And what's important is not that you make a mistake, but that you can grow from those mistakes. And I
yes.
think to some degree, this is where some of the challenges as Africans might come in as well, because we grow up with this sense of scarcity and we work really hard.
Mm,
And as we get older, we become really good at what we do. We become really good at excellence. And sometimes that excellence now begins to, you know, inch into the sphere of an obsession with perfection.
mm,
And you then become more conservative. You begin to risk less
mm,
because you feel like by being perfect, you can be excellent. By being excellent, you can keep your position and you can
yeah.
get all the things that you wanted to achieve for yourself. So one of the downsides of
Mm,
our resilience, our commitment to excellence, is the obsession with perfection, which
yeah.
becomes the amplification of fear, which ultimately makes us less
Mm,
courageous. So that's a particular point that I want young people, especially young Africans, to be aware of. You got to
wow.
find that balance. Yeah, the last is resilience. And I think that's just a fundamental idea that whatever struggles we face as human beings, or particularly as Africans, it doesn't matter. But especially as Africans, this has been going on for a while. It's taken different forms,
Mm,
but it's been going on for a while. And in the foreseeable future might continue. Look at the world today. You know, so just understand that. So this is not a battle that you're gonna fight and win in 10 minutes. You gotta go the
yeah.
distance. So stay strong, watch your health, build platforms for sustainability, build
Mm.
relationships that last because you're going to need resilience because this is going to be a long, long haul. Anyway, I stop there.
Wow. I mean, this feels like a masterclass to me. And it's interesting how your some of the things that you're saying are just resonating. When you talked about how um, this obsession with perfection sometimes can hinder you and can lead to fear unconsciously. I'm realizing that it's really, really true because if you're so used to doing something good or making sure that you get something done in a certain way, it can stop you from doing something new because now you're waiting for all of the pieces to fall together perfectly. You're waiting for for the right time, the right space, the right resources. You want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that everything lines up perfectly. And then you don't start. And
Mm-hmm.
next thing you know, you are afraid to start because things are not perfect yet.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
And,
not,
and again, it's that, you know, and I say so with all honesty and seriousness because I've seen my life. I can show up somewhere and I can be 100% of myself and feel really, really good,
mhm.
but I can be 70% of myself and still succeed. But I
Yeah.
almost never show up 70% of myself. I always feel like I need to be dialed up 100%. And that
Mm.
additional time stress that it takes to get to that 100%. The guy who's showing up and he's 50%, he's in the conversation. And by the time I'm there, he's been picked to do the big thing and he's off and doing it. And I show up
Yeah.
100% and they say, oh, no, you're a little late.
Sorry, you're
So
too
there's a
late.
cost. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, this is incredible. You've spoken a lot about mentorship. You have mentored, and I think I want you to touch on how important mentorship is for young people in Africa and how they can actively seek or create those relationships. I was in a conversation with a colleague a few days ago, and we're talking about people that we respect and admire in the media industry, and she was telling me that in as much as you respect, admire some people. Sometimes it's best to, admire from afar than seeking, a relationship or a mentorship relationship, because sometimes, you don't exactly get what you maybe expect from them, or,
Mhm.
the relationship can end up, not fulfilling what, the intention it is meant to fulfill. So I'm realizing that a lot of
Yeah.
people are skeptical about the idea of mentorship right now. But I know that it does work. I've seen people that it has worked for, and I've also seen people that it hasn't exactly worked for. So, how do you
Mhm.
look at mentorship, and how do you get the best out of mentors? How do you even know who's a good mentor and who's not one?
Oh wow. A lot of questions. I think that's a good set of questions, and I'm going to try my best. I think first and foremost, the whole set of relationships that we call mentorship really is a spectrum, a number of different models. And let me explain what I mean by that. And I won't touch on all of them, but for example, coaching is one model, and essentially you spending time with somebody who's helping you think through a problem and direct you to find the resources that you can marshal to solve that problem. But mostly through the resources that are already there that you may not be aware of or you may not be optimizing or using. But
Okay.
the idea there is they help you discover different paths, and you then discover your own strength that you might not have appreciated before.
Hmm.
That's different from mentoring in the technical sense, which is where you are now working closely with someone who might have had more experience than you in a certain area, and it's now imparting to you their wisdom. You know, there's a little bit of coaching in it to some degree, but they're not necessarily sitting back and just trying to guide you to find your own answers. Although they might be doing that. Mentoring though has more of a here's what happened to me, here's what I did. They're bringing themselves into the conversation, and in some ways they're trying to get you to explore things based on their own knowledge of how things work. It's a slightly
Hmm.
different dynamic. Coaching and mentoring, people use them interchangeably, but they both sound alike. But I think one allows you to lead and as your own agent, and the other one is a little bit more collaborative and directive to some degree. And I'm
Okay.
not saying one's better or worse. I personally prefer mentoring because coaching for me takes too much time kind of dancing around things. I just challenge people, say, hey, have you thought about this? And now let's talk about why or why not you don't think it makes sense for you. I just like to get to the point. But that's my personal style. And then, regardless of whether you mentor or coach, hopefully you have both. The third thing is now advocacy, where in a situation with that person, where that person has the ability to actually offer you opportunities to grow
Hmm.
and or is putting your name forward actively. And so most times you have to be in a similar context of that person because now that person is extending themselves to giving you opportunities. And so they want to close it out. So I think over time, young people in Africa are probably going to look for, discover, stumble upon all three of those. But I think the bottom line is you need to have your own board of advisors, your own
Okay.
identified group of people who you go to for advice, for context,
Hmm.
throughout your life. And at different points in time, there might be a coach, there might be mentor, there might be advocates, there might be all three. You might
Hmm.
have people playing different roles like that in your life, but you always need to have somebody. The point is, you never should be walking alone. That's my fundamental point here.
Hmm.
And you will discover what texture of support you need over time. And why is that important? It goes back to one of the points I made earlier. There's just too much coming at you, and as a young person who's trying to experience life, you need someone to help put some of this stuff in context for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might be staring at danger and not know that you're staring at danger, or you might be staring at opportunity and not know that you're staring at opportunity. And so
Hmm.
sometimes these external voices help you. But like you said, you have to be very thoughtful of who is doing this work for you.
Hmm.
Because if they are limiting you with their own conservative views of the world, or trying to put you in a box, or well, you're a young man, or you're a young woman, or your gender, you can't do this. If they are beginning to limit you in any way, you have to keep your instincts up while you have a sense of that and
Yeah.
know when to identify how to identify that and then walk away because
Mm.
that's not being helpful to you. And I think you also have to be very clear in your mind that if a mentor or anyone in your life is not leaving you feeling stronger, empowered, more optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
then they're not good for you. If when they're done with you, you feel like you're afraid of them, you feel like they've closed doors and they've not explained why, you feel diminished, you feel questioned, you feel like they've dialed you back or dumbed you
Mm-hmm.
down, you want to ask yourself why. Because maybe that's not the right person for you. I think the right person is always going to give you energy and not take energy away from you. So that's really important for you to be intensely aware of and used always in judging and assessing the relationships that you move forward with versus the ones that you drop. So,
Mm.
but really important to do all of those things. But again, at the end of the day, though, it's up to you though to show up with a sense of seriousness and commitment.
Yeah.
And I don't expect the young people I mentor to know everything, but I expect them to be willing to change. I expect them to be curious. I expect
Mm.
them to be open to be challenged.
Mm.
When I'm giving you perspectives, and if you have an answer for everything, and that answer is designed to leave you in the place where you are, I sort of have
Mm.
you try things out, test things out. If I give you contacts to reach out to and you don't follow up, if it looks like you're not doing your homework, you want
Yeah.
answers, but you don't want to invest yourself, then my conclusion is that you're not ready yet for at least the kind of
Mm.
mentorship coaching that I offer. And I'm definitely never going to get to the point of advocacy because I don't want to waste an opportunity on one person who's not serious or ready for that. So,
Exactly.
so you have to show up strong and committed. And by and large, the people I meet, they all tend to show up that way. I think they're not all in the same place. And I'm very quickly able to, offer people the perspective that I think meets them where they are. But what
Yeah.
I'm really, really interested in more than anything else is whether they come back a few months later, a few weeks later, and tell me that they tried this or that, and here's how it worked, how it didn't work, and we can
Mm.
continue the journey. Some people show up once and they don't come back, and some people are regular. They check in every other quarter, every other month,
Yeah.
and some people never came back, but you see them years later and they say, "I did what you said," and oh my God, here's what happened in my life. Or you said something which you weren't even sure was important to me, but I heard it and I listened to it.
And I
And
ran with it.
I've ran it, I've always, so it's a mixed bag. But I think the bottom line is you got to know who you're speaking to. They have to be qualified to help you. Don't
Yeah.
empower people to disempower you.
Mm.
You got to know yourself and know that you're showing up strong and showing up committed. And you also have to be able to put some time and energy into the conversation and the relationship. And but above all, you should never think in this world, in this environment, because social media that a lot of young people grow up with makes them more isolationist than anything else. And it's called social, but it also
Yeah.
creates individuals that have maybe more confidence than they need to have for what they know and what they've accomplished. So yeah, I think you should never feel like you can walk this journey alone.
Yeah.
It is not easy to walk alone. And it's definitely not easy to walk alone if you don't have a strong depth of understanding of history and why
Mm.
things are the way they are, because everything is connected and you can better understand your own choices and better analyze a context when you have a good sense of the history that pertains to you. So those are the things that I try to help people. People always wonder,
Mm.
"Hey, why is he mentoring me and why are we talking about something that happened 20 years ago?" I'm like, dude, you need to understand the stuff. You need to understand, number one, that you're not the first. As much as you feel,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that you feel that way, but you're not the first. And here's how people before you manage to it. And here are the patterns. Here are the patterns that human
Mm.
nature has followed day in, day out. It might be today in 2026 and we're talking AI, but the patterns are not very different than how we reacted to the invention of, the printing press
Of the
or the,
internet,
fir-
yeah.
or the first TV or the first radio or the internet. Exactly. The patterns are not very different. You can actually become way more powerful as a person if you understand how human nature has reacted to some of these changes and the patterns that we've exhibited. It can help
Mm,
you if you can understand and contextualize it for today, know where things are actually going, and make you way more confident about what you're doing.
wow. Thank you for breaking all of this down. I know that, we're getting close to time, and
Yeah.
I do have one final question for you, which would be like a takeaway from this conversation. If you could leave any young person listening to you right now and who wants to succeed in maybe the corporate space or the entrepreneurship space and step into leadership with one guiding principle, a principle that it can hold on to for the next 10 years, what would that principle be?
Believe in yourself. I mean,
Mm,
at the end of the day, you have more capacity than you sometimes accept to acknowledge. And there's just so much going on in the world today, and there's so many agendas and so many players, and we talk about multipolarity and all sorts of things. At the end of
yeah.
the day, you cannot see yourself, and we cannot see ourselves as spectators. We have to be actors. And so, but for that to happen, we have to believe in our own agency, our own ability to impact things. So that's what I would say, believe in yourself. But that's not just a mantra, it's not a phrase. You got to break that down. And I think so the courage framework helps break it down how you can then sort of strengthen yourself to sort of act on a belief system that empowers you. So I think that's what I would say, believe in yourself and don't be distracted by all the things going on about you. Be aware, but don't be distracted. I
Mm,
was just in Davos last week and I was in a conference in a session about Africa actually. And I
yeah.
remember someone saying something that I thought was quite interesting. He said it's not about looking to the east or the west and trying to draw energy or become a follower of what's happening to the east or the west. It's about Africa looking instead forward at what our own aspirations are and using our own agency to get there. So I think that's a big thing. It's sort of this idea of agency over followership. Don't look east or west, look forward and believe in
Mm.
yourself as you do so.
Look forward, believe in yourself as you do so.
Yeah.
Word. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christopher. This has been it's been an enlightening conversation, not just for people who listen to this podcast, but for me personally, as
Yeah.
someone who works in the media space and in the entrepreneurship space as well. Um, I appreciate it, and congratulations on the new book. I
Thank
know
you.
that a lot of people would benefit from the book. Please, if you can just repeat some information about the book, where to get it, how to get it. And I'm sure in the show notes, for those who are listening, I'm going to put some information about where to find Christopher if you want to book him for speaking engagements or panel sessions, or even how to, get access to some of his material. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the book is Courage, Courage, with periods in between each letter, 7
Okay.
choices for living a fulfilling life. And it's available on Amazon, some bookstores around the world, but mostly Amazon. And very shortly will be available on my website, www.courage7choices, all one word.com. And yeah, look forward to engaging and connecting. It's an exciting time to be alive, and I hope that we are approaching it with a lot of confidence and with a lot of agency.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great chatting with you.
You've been listening to the Minding Your Business Africa podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and rate us on your streaming platforms. Minding Your Business Africa is produced by Africatalks Network. Our executive producers are Fola Folayon and Nelly Kalu. Royalty-free music provided by Melody Loops. Mixing and mastering by Fola Folayon.